Hello and welcome to Mullen's Benefits Companion, a podcast that helps employers navigate the complex legal challenges of managing their employee benefit plans. I'm your host, Brydon DeWitt, and today I'm joined by Christian Mosier, president of BenX Consulting. Welcome to the Benefits Companion.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Brydon.
Christian, we've been having conversations over the last couple of years about, the trends and things that we see in the industry. And I'm, of course, coming from a legal perspective, but I'm excited to have you here as a consultant and someone, really where the rubber hits the road on what employers are facing in the current benefits environment. And so I was excited to have you on here today to share your insights about the trends that you're seeing with
Sure.
mid-sized companies. And I know we were talking earlier about some of the topics that you wanted to discuss. So let's just kick it off. What are you seeing? What are some of the trends and important concepts that mid-sized employers need to be aware of and what they're facing?
Yeah, great question. I would say in thinking about this question, mid-size is such a vague employer term. I would say I'm specifically addressing kind of the 100 to 1,000 employee market. I would say
Right.
maybe a little less than 1,000, but those mid-size employers, we're really seeing some common trends emerge, especially moving forward. So I think this year it's really increasing from a trend perspective, and then obviously benefit trends for 2026. So there's a few things that we're really seeing emerge, and one is just cost. I mean, cost is always an issue, Brydon. I mean, we talk about it from a carrier standpoint or a self-funded standpoint or even compliance standpoint. Cost is on the forefront of the minds of mid-sized employers more than ever. I think I read a study, Brydon, that I think the average mid-sized employer or employee-only premium on health insurance is $650 a month. And that's the average.
Right.
And so costs, a decade ago when your insurance premiums were $350 a month, it was a lot easier for the employer to either cover it all or cover 90% of it or a high percentage. Now we're talking about an employer spending somewhere between $5,000 and $8,000 a year just to cover 80 to 90% of employee only premium, not even of a family premium. We're just talking about the employee only.
Right.
And so the cost is just becoming a bigger issue for these employers. So I guess a couple of trends we're seeing on the typical carrier side, it seems like the last few years has been 10% medical trend, give or take, somewhere between 6 and 10% in medical trend ever since the outlook of COVID after 2020.
So are you
So
saying year after year we're seeing
year
this
after year.
6 to 10%? I
Yeah,
mean, that's really dramatic.
yeah, and a medical trend standpoint, exactly. And of course, it's different for each employer because each employer projects a different set of risk for the carrier or the TPA or the captive or whatever it may be. But on average, right, when you're talking about the big four carriers, you're talking about Aetna, Anthem, Cigna, and United. We've been seeing somewhere between a 6 and 11% medical trend over the last few years. What's driving that, though, Brydon, especially in mid-sized employers? A big cost is the specialty RX, right? And you're probably seeing these with like GLP-1s, like these weight loss drugs, and even gene therapies and just specialty drugs in general. There's been an inflation in total cost of these drugs. So when the employers have members that are taking these drugs, that obviously increases the claim spend, which in turn increases the renewal. And so we're seeing a lot of mid-sized employers more than ever push for proactive consulting. We used to see in that like 100 to 500 employee range that maybe it would be less of a proactive process and more reactive depending on what the renewal actually was. But now we see employers, that are 500 employees that are starting 6 months early and having just a year-round conversation when it comes to employee benefits because they want to see self-funding and captives and specialty drug management and all these vendors.
Right. So it's not, for the mid-sized employers where in the past they may have waited closer to the end of the plan year and they renew. And again, the employee only rates around $300 and it wasn't take that much analysis, but now it's really hitting the bottom line.
Exactly.
And you're talking about, the prescription drugs and GLP-1s and these really high-end, high expense prescription drugs. Are these employers negotiating with the carriers to cut out coverage for certain
Yeah,
prescription drugs to get their rates down?
yeah, good question. We see a lot of employers doing that as far as like when it's not medically necessary, maybe it's for weight loss. We're seeing some potential, like especially self-funded employers that have more control over their health plan, Bryden.
Right.
I would say a big thing that has really emerged in the last couple of years, I think it's going to become an even bigger trend in the next few years. We're seeing a lot of interest in transparent PBMs. We're seeing a lot of interest in specialty drug vendors and specialty drug, essentially companies that can help almost get the specialty drug, whether it's a Humira or whatever it might be, off the health plan through like a manufacturer's assistance program, a patient assistance program. So we're seeing a lot more interest, at least. I wouldn't say it's been a quote unquote trend officially, but we're seeing a lot more interest in those mid-sized employers exploring unbundled health plan options, essentially meaning you're working with an independent TPA and then you're kind of building your health plan, even at 100 employees. We're going through a study right now for a 100 employee company that if they went off the carrier chastity and they went to an independent TPA and then got a captive and then got an independent PBM, that can really help eliminate some of those spread pricing costs that a traditional carrier PBM might hold.
Are they doing that for their across the board for their group health plan, or are they carving out disease management or special, the more costly aspects of their plan? Are they carving those out into the, or are you saying this is across the board going
Great
into?
question. Great question. It's a little bit of both, but the trend is more across the board.
Uh-huh.
And it's across the board, meaning employers are looking at these independent pharmacy benefit managers because when the carrier's PBMs, right? Like when you're with a carrier, you don't know what they're getting the drug for and then what they're charging your claim fund or what they're charging your employer, what you're paying for it as the employer, right? So there's a lot. In fact, I'm sure you've seen Mark Cuban and like all the, hype that he's manufactured in the last couple years, specifically around independent PBMs. And I'm seeing a good amount of companies evaluate an independent PBM for everything, Brian, not just the specialty drug. Now, that is a component. Sometimes you might have, a larger employer that's self-funded, maybe directly with a carrier. Maybe they're large enough they can carve out a specialty drug program or use another vendor or something like that. So that is an option, but really we're seeing it across the board.
Yeah, just from a legal standpoint, especially with self-insured plans, I'm concerned about the litigation regarding pharmacy benefit manager
Mm-hmm.
agreements and pharmacy arrangements. The Johnson and Johnson case was the first, shot across the bow, and employers have been having success recently shooting those claims down based on standing, and that's really a technical legal issue as to whether the plaintiffs have the ability to bring the claim, and it's really a pleadings issue. And I think the
Mm-hmm.
plaintiff's bar is going to get smarter because the facts in some of these cases are so egregious where a drug that you get at Walmart for $30, the plan was paying $10,000 for. It's just begging for these lawsuits to happen. And employers have been fortunate lately on the standing grounds that those claims have been dismissed. But I think the plaintiff's bar is going to get smarter. They're going to get beyond that barrier and get beyond the motion to dismiss. But the frustrating part of it is the employers, they're running their business. They're not setting up the network. They're not engaging the pharmacy benefit manager and coming up with the formularies and the amounts that are paid and the rebates and all of that. Those are all arranged by the PBMs and the Anthems,
Yep.
United Healthcares, and Cignas of the world. And as an employer, you're just going in there and saying, hey, we want pharmacy benefits. And
Mm-hmm.
the carrier, the third party administrator says, okay, well, here's our agreement, right? Sign up. And they don't have the expertise to really dig into that or really the leverage to do it. So when you're
Right.
talking about more transparency in PBMs, I like hearing that. I think this is something that employers need to pay attention to try to get more clarity on what their plans, especially the self-insured plans, on what they're
Exactly.
paying for prescription drugs. Do you know what these behind the scenes arrangements are with the PBMs and the third party administrators and the pharmaceutical companies and the pharmacies?
Exactly. And I almost think so the couple lawsuits that obviously you're familiar with and we know about like Johnson and Johnson, and they've been the employees that are bringing, these lawsuits essentially. For me, it's almost time for employers to get mad. It's time for employers to say this is egregious. Like, yeah, I know we're contracting with this PBM, but this drug is $30 at Walmart. Why are we, a self-funded employer, covering it at $10,000?
Right.
Because that's what a lot of people miss. Like employers, they're like, well, my employee, their max out of pocket is 3,000. It's like, well, that's great, but you're paying for it as a self-funded employer. And that affects not just currently the cash flow, but it also affects your renewals. It affects your risk pool. It affects like your future years, especially as those compound. Brian, we've seen even with smaller employers, say 100 employees, we have seen similar numbers to that. We have seen some small employers that are either level funded or it's some form of self-funded, maybe with a consortium or maybe with a carrier or maybe even with a captive arrangement. And we've seen some of these big box PBMs. We could get a drug for $40 and they're paying $3,000 for this drug. Think
Yeah.
about that if you're a 100 employee company. That's a $2,700 or whatever officially it is. I mean, or $2,900 swing, and the employer is paying for that.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the standing grounds, the reason these cases are being dismissed is, of course, you're saying, well, you employees haven't shown you're being harmed. You haven't shown that your premiums have increased or your wages have gone down. You haven't shown you've been harmed by these arrangements. But without a doubt, our self-insured employers are being harmed. It's hitting their
Yeah.
bottom line directly. So they should, I think you have a point there.
Exactly.
And one
And
of the issues that I see every year, several clients, there'll be a situation where they have an employee who's on a specialty drug, they're self-insured, and they have to pay $50,000 a month for this drug for an employee. It's covered under the plan. What do we do? So
Mhm.
it's a real issue, and I wonder, well, maybe if we didn't have the arrangement with the PBM, that drug wouldn't be $50,000. I mean, I don't know. I think it's really something for self-insured employers that sponsor self-insured plans to really pay attention to.
It is. And that's why, hence this rise in the trend. We haven't seen a ton of these mid-sized employers pick it up yet. Now, there has been a couple, but we have not seen, especially in Virginia, this be a huge trend with the independent PBMs, but it's starting to become a huge conversation. And so it's only a matter of time before more of these are adopted. And the way these independent PBMs work, I think it's important to clarify. Like Mark Cuban, for example, it's cost plus, or it's essentially the cost plus drug. And so what that means is if the drug costs $50, they're only charging a distribution fee or they're only charging an admin fee. These independent PBMs are not doing spread pricing. They're not keeping all these rebates. In a traditional PBM arrangement, there's spread pricing, meaning the PBM gets the drug from the manufacturer at $5 and charges the plan $25, whatever
Right.
it might be. And then there's also rebates like that manufacturers give for having their drug on the formulary. So Humira might give Cigna's PBM a huge rebate for having their drug on the formulary, right?
And that impacts cost as well because there's an incentive to put maybe higher cost drugs on the formulary for
Mm-hmm.
which they're getting a rebate and exclude generics or other drugs that aren't paying the rebate.
Could be cheaper or biosimilars, exactly, or
Yeah,
something like
biosimilar
that.
drugs that would do have the same impact.
Yeah. And so that's why these independent PBMs are becoming a bigger deal because as an employer, I'm thinking like for our employer clients, a lot of times it's in their best interest just to have an independent PBM where they're paying the cost of the drug and then you're just paying some type of admin fee or delivery fee or plus fee per distribution or something. Something like that and the transparency around that is what we're striving for. It's just more like with the Consolidated Appropriations Act that was passed a few years ago, that now brokers have to disclose their commissions and compensation, which I think should have always been a thing.
Right.
But that a few years ago just got signed into legislation, so we're starting to see more transparency, and I think that's a big way we can cut down costs. Because if we're hiding compensation, not just on the broker side, but on the PBM side and the claim side with the actual medical claims, if we're hiding a lot of this stuff, how can we attack it? I mean, there's really no way to attack it. So anyway, that's been a big trend that we're starting to see. I think we're going to see a lot more of, because last thing I'll say about prescription drugs and independent PBMs and stuff is, it used to be before COVID and 10 years ago that pharmacy claims made up 10% of your claims as an employer, give or take. Like, so if you're an employer and you had $10 million of claims in a year, pharmacy would be around $1 million. Obviously that's very dependent on employer, but it used to be, somewhere between 5 to 15% of your total claims are pharmacy. Now we're seeing 40% of your
Wow.
total claims are pharmacy. And now, obviously, that's not true for every employer, but we're seeing, somewhere between 20 and 50% now of the total claims being spent by the employer in their claim fund being paid out in RX or pharmacy claims.
Yeah, and that's why this episode on trends has focused so much on pharmacy.
Exactly.
It's because it's such a cost driver.
Exactly.
So what else? Let's move off of pharmacy. What else are you seeing? What are some?
Yeah, I would say a good piggyback off that, just the transparency around it, which we just touched on. I think employers more than ever want more transparency in what, like, the benefit firms are being paid. Obviously, with the independent PBMs, they just want more transparency into data, right? Their claim data. I think that's becoming a bigger trend, is transparency in general.
Well, it takes transparency. Also, it takes the ability to digest and understand the data that you're getting.
Exactly. Yeah. And so you can make educated decisions, and someone in my seat can actually look at the data
Right.
and be like, here's some strategies that we could potentially implement to reduce this cost. I would say the third trend that we're really seeing is a focus on benefits as almost I mean, it's always been a recruiting and retention tool, right? But now benefits are really becoming a competitive advantage for some companies. And so and I think this is a good trend. We're seeing more employers dive into what their specific employee population wants. We're seeing more benefit surveys being done. We're seeing more focus groups. We're seeing more conversations done with benefit groups and committees. And employers really want to, obviously, we talked about cost. Employers want to maximize the ROI, essentially. They want to say, are we spending the right amount of money for our benefit program as a whole? And so as costs continue to rise, they want to make sure they're allocating those dollars towards the right benefits, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really the two-way communication here. I think that's so important to understand what the employees want, because again, as you said, I mean, that's the whole point of the benefits, is to attract and retain employees. And so to
Exactly.
find out what is actually important to them, instead of making assumptions or doing what we've done for the last 30 years, find out what the modern workforce wants. The other side of that is employers have to communicate. You could have a fantastic benefit program, one that meets the desires of the employees, but if you don't communicate it, if you can't break through to the employees to help them understand what's being offered, then it doesn't serve your purposes of retention. And I think that's a big challenge for employers, is getting through to employees who are busy working. They might not want to read an email coming from the benefits department. They may not want to attend a seminar or open enrollment presentation. It's
Mm-hmm.
hard sometimes to help employees understand, hey, your employer is really doing a great job, really offering you some fantastic benefits. So I think the
Exactly.
communication, I mean, it's important to get that communication from employees to learn what they need, but then also communicating to employees what's available.
Exactly. Especially with the workforce, you see it. I mean, you have people that are 21 years old that are in the workforce, and then you still have people who are 65, 70. So we're talking about a bunch of different generational classes. I mean, everything from, I forgot what the one behind Generation Z is, but there's all kinds of different classes that employers are now having to cater towards, to where, you might see people in their 20s really care about PTO and mental health, for example. Then you
Right.
might have to redesign your benefit package based on your employee demographics. I mean, mental health is it had I didn't really mention it as a trend on this podcast because it really has been a trend since COVID, has been mental health benefits and making sure that those are aligned with your employee demographics. But I think employers, from a benefit standpoint, this is the toughest time to to have a benefit program as an employer. Like, I don't know how you feel, but between all the different age gaps, between all the different benefits now that are out there, between the cost of health insurance and retirement and all of these benefits, and now obviously in your world, Brydon, between the legislation now that a 200 employee company has to make sure to adhere to that they didn't have to 10 years ago. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that too. I feel like now it's almost I mean, obviously employers still need to do it and do right by their employees, but it almost seems like it's becoming tougher and tougher to really have a great benefit program as an employer.
Well, definitely from a legal compliance standpoint, it's getting just increasingly complex. When I started practicing employee benefits law a long time ago, I thought defined benefit pension plans and retirement plans, qualified plans, that was the difficult area of compliance. And health and welfare there was a lot less regulation. Well, health and welfare is caught up, more than caught up. I mean, it's, with the ACA and the Consolidated Appropriations Act
Mm.
and all of the disclosure requirements and reporting requirements. Um, it's there's a lot of burden on employers. I mean, even things like if you're signing a new third party administration agreement,
Mm-hmm.
you got to make sure there's no gag clause that is in there because you're prohibited by federal law from entering into an agreement that has a gag clause, and employers even have to certify at the end of every year that there's no gag clause. And that's just one little example of something that, especially for mid-sized employers, that's difficult to catch. And
Yeah.
there's just a lot of legal requirements, a lot of pitfalls.
Yeah.
So,
It's refreshing to see a lot of the employers, I'm sure that you work with too, Brian, that like they want to do right by their employees. Like
oh,
they're fighting the good fight. They want to be in compliance. They want to offer a great benefit program despite cost. They want to communicate the right way. It's just now balancing all of those is becoming a lot more for
all right,
sure.
all right.
Yeah.
Well, on that cheery note, I think we'll wrap this up. Thank you so much for joining me on the Benefits Companion. It was a very interesting conversation.
Absolutely. Brian, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So again, that'll wrap up our episode of the Benefits Companion. If listeners have any questions or suggestions for future episodes of this podcast, you can visit our employee benefits page at williamsmullen.com/employee benefits. There you can find out more about our team as well as past episodes of this podcast and legal alerts. Finally, be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified when our next episode posts. Thanks for listening.
This podcast contains general, condensed summaries of actual legal matters, statutes, and opinions for informational and educational purposes only. It is not meant to be and should not be construed as legal advice. Listeners with particular needs on specific issues should retain the services of competent counsel. For more information, please visit our website at www.williamsmullen.com or contact any member of our team.